our favorite attorney, Miss April Preyar. How you doing today?
I am good, Miss Xavier Fox. How are you?
I am great, girl. It was a great show before you. I see you caught the tail end of it, huh?
I absolutely did. It made me wonder what I had missed.
Oh yeah, Khalid has a great show too. He has a great show, and he has a pretty good following going on. You and him are kind of neck and neck up in here. Y'all got it going on.
All right, we might have to do a show together.
That would be quite interesting. You could do a show. Well, you're not a divorce attorney though. So, okay.
I'm not.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to you. I'm here. I will be interjecting with some questions and comments, I'm quite sure, but the mic is all yours.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. And for those who are not familiar with me, my name is April Preyar. I am a Chicago native and I have been practicing law in Chicago as of yesterday, made 22 years. And I have, thank you. And I have been doing criminal defense the entire 22 years, save maybe like 3 months. But so I tell people, if you're gonna call in and you got a question for me, because I get calls all the time, don't call me asking me about no divorce law, don't ask me about your foreclosure, don't ask me about real estate, don't ask me about any of that, because I don't know. I have no problem telling people what I don't know. What I know quite well is criminal defense and anything related to police misconduct, police abuse, because I've also done civil rights cases. So today we're going to jump right in. I will start off by saying that everything I talk about comes from a criminal defense slant. And I caught some flack for this on Facebook the other day when I posted it saying I'm not an ex-prosecutor, I'm not a prosecutor, but I'll point out to you that most of the pundits, most of the commentators you see on your TV are either prosecutors or ex-prosecutors. And that's fine, but if you at a point in your career, for the bulk of your career, spent time sending little Black boys and Black men to prison, and then you suddenly switch gears, that's still your slant. And what I'm saying is from day one, even before I got to the public defender's office, even before I went into private practice, that I interned at the public defender's office in DC when I was in law school, again, doing the same thing, helping criminal defendants. And so the way I've always seen it is that I help the underdog, that I fight for those who oftentimes families even turn their backs on them. So everything I say will come from that slant. Most of my guests will come from that slant. And I think it's a different perspective that most of us don't get to see. And a big part of that perspective is protecting your rights. Anyone with a law enforcement background, anybody who's a prosecutor is going to tell you comply, comply, comply. They're not going to tell you how to protect your constitutional rights so that you don't end up with a conviction. And that is the major difference between me and them. But I want to jump right into, there's so much going on in the news. I mean, we got a few old cases that I'll chime in on, but the one I want to lead with is this PPP loan fraud that is rampant. And it's funny because when it first happened, when people first started getting the PPP loans, actually my firm took on helping small businesses get on board, helping them figure out how to fill out the application. We even did applications for some folks. And as a result, after a few months passed, though, we started getting these weird phone calls, people saying, hey, you a lawyer? Will you write a letter for me saying that I've been in business for 5 years, even though I ain't been in business for 5 days? And I was like, it's very strange. Like I didn't get it at first. And then a cousin of mine told me that he just was talking to friends in the streets who he knew full well were not business owners, hadn't sold anything illegal, at least in ever. And they were getting $20,000, $10,000, $30,000 in PPP loans. Wow. And I said then that there was going to be a huge backlash. And then I started getting the emails for our continuing legal education. They're all on different topics. And a lot of them were federal cases in federal court where basically they were putting together a task force to go after these folks. And I was like, oh, this is really turning quite ugly. And then yesterday I saw on the news that right here outside of Chicago in the near south suburbs in Markham, that I think there are 1,400 that they believe 1,400 fake businesses.
Oh my God.
Well, they don't know for sure. So they're investigating them all. But what kicked off the investigation was a police officer apparently filed for his application and used the police station as his address for his business that doesn't exist. So that kicked off the investigation. And now they are looking into, I believe the number is either 1,100 or 1,400. And if you are from Chicago and you know how small Markham is, that number alone is mind-blowing. So 1,400 different businesses that they suspect are not real, but walked away with $20,000 and up.
I was just about to say Markham is about to be empty over there.
You're right. Not many more than 1,400 people live out in Markham. I know I'm gonna have some Markham residents mad at me. So, but with that being said, they are coming for you. So if you are one of these people who made up a business after, I think the cutoff was, I think they wanted you to have a business like say March. If the pandemic hit in 2020 in March, they wanted your business to have been around, let's just say since March of the previous year. And so what was happening was people were like, oh no, I'm gonna give me some of this free money. I'm going to say my business existed then. I'm going to falsify pay stubs. I'm going to falsify 1099s and W-2s and whatever else. I'm gonna use grandma's social, who ain't worked in 30 years, but I'm gonna put her social security number down. I'm gonna use my cousin's social and say that she worked for me and we all gonna get this money and split it. So those are the schemes that I've heard of, but they are coming for you. There's no way you're going to rob Uncle Sam, which is essentially what you did. There's no way you're going to falsify documents that then get filed with the federal government, with the US Treasury, and you expect to maintain that windfall. And the problem is, say you got $30,000, you got $20,000. How about when you get busted by the feds, your federal case, your attorney's fees are going to cost you well more than $20,000. Like normally federal
spiders, they got them spiders. They're going to have to sell all those spiders.
What's a spider?
Those
the cars,
them little 3-wheel bike things you seen everybody on this summer. I'm like, I know you ain't really bought that. You got a PPP loan.
I did. And then that's the other mistake too, is that people went to social media bragging about what they spent the money on. And the task force is specifically going to scroll down your social media page and notice the difference. Like, okay, well, 6 months before she was posting about, dinners at McDonald's, and now she's posted, she's posted up on the front of her Porsche. Like, they're going to note the difference. They're going to print that stuff out, and they're going to say that's what you use the money for, because that's the other part. 75% of those loans were specifically supposed to go to payroll. A lot of these people had no payroll. They had no employees. They didn't have themselves listed on payroll. It was all fictitious. And now there's an audit that comes automatically to see if you use the money appropriately. So you can't keep falsifying documents and sending them to the feds and not expect the feds to go and knock on your front door.
That sounded real. Girl, do you know how many people are taking pictures off of Facebook right now?
Yeah, but they can trace that too. So, y'all can go ahead and do the deep purge, but they're going to go back and get that metadata, and they're going to prance it out in front of you on trial, and you got a lot to answer for. So I'm going to warn folks now. And I actually, even started getting calls saying, well, hey, my friend, he got 20,000, but he only spent about 5. Can he give it back? And I'm like, nah, it doesn't really work like that. You still falsify documents. You still lie to the federal government. You might want to hold on to those funds because they're absolutely going to make you pay it back and then some. But like I mentioned, those attorney's fees also get tacked on top of that too.
So if there is someone who knows that they did this and they're listening, what should they do right now before they get the
they should contact legal counsel. Like, whether they're in a position to drop $30,000 to hire a criminal defense attorney or not, they need to contact one now and stop spending the money. That would be the other thing. Put the money to the side, whatever you have left, because there's something called restitution. Anytime you have a financial crime, I've had what do they call these gift card scams from Target. I've had all these different types of financial cases. And the one thing that is consistent, no matter what the scheme is, that they always want you to pay back that entity that you took the money from. So you might as well put that money to the side because you will be paying restitution, and you need to contact a lawyer now so that you know how to proceed. But the main thing is when they knock on your door, what most people want to do is they want to tell their sob story. Well, you know, grandma was sick and and the house was in foreclosure and that's why I did it. Well, why you did it makes absolutely no difference because that doesn't change what your actions were. The judge doesn't care your reasons why. They care that you broke the law. And the last thing is the more you talk, the more you give up your rights. It's basically a confession. So again, another reason to have a criminal defense attorney on standby. What you're going to say when they knock on your door is, I want a lawyer, and you're not going to say another word because anything else you say is not going to help you. Just like they say on the TV shows, whatever you say can and will be used against you. That is absolutely fact. I'm not sure how people all glaze over that when we've all heard it on Law and Order and Criminal Minds and CSI, probably since we were 4 or 5, but you want to know to say, I want a lawyer and not say another word. Talk to your lawyer. Sometimes in federal cases, it is beneficial for you to cooperate, but you're never going to cooperate without speaking to a lawyer first, without making a game plan with that lawyer first, and without deciding together how to proceed.
Okay. All right. I hope everybody heard that. I'm here to ask the questions that the people who haven't figured out how to get on Zoom aren't here to ask. I just wanted them to know, if you are one of those people, this is what you need to do. Stop spending the money and contact an attorney to have them on standby. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, you may not ultimately be able to pay for that attorney's fees because you burned through all the money because you didn't have any other income and you were using this essentially as your come up. You hit a lick, as they say in Chicago, and you may not have money left over. It might all be gone, and then somebody from the federal defender program will be appointed to represent you. But in the meantime, you can call and get a free consultation or a consultation that costs you a couple $100 so that you have a game plan. Because a big part, and I'm going to talk about this later, a big part of what Black folks like to do is we choose oftentimes to be reactive, not proactive. We want to wait and see. We want to wait for everything to hit the fan and just kind of see how it lands and then assess. And that's usually the wrong way to proceed. Rather, you always want to have a game plan, always have a worst case scenario, always be prepared for what's to come. And with the PPP loans, I'm telling you, it's going to be mass arrests. And people are going to be facing federal crimes, and they're going to have no game plan. They're going to have nobody in their family to turn to because they listed all their family members on these false documents, and they're probably going to be getting rounded up too.
Wow. So even if you were listed on there?
Well, at the very least, they're going to contact you because they don't know who filed the paperwork. I mean, they know that the business owner did, but so did you falsify this document with your social security number? Did somebody else steal your social security number and put it on there? Did, grandma get a check from this come up, or was she just an unwitting victim? They're going to do the investigation to find out. That's why everybody in the family needs to shut up and lawyer up. And that's my motto: shut up and lawyer up. And then you can assess, then you can decide how to proceed. And like I said, in federal cases, sometimes it does benefit you to cooperate. In state cases, it almost never does. So I just say, shut up, lawyer up, talk to a lawyer, be honest with your lawyer, and then figure out how to go and where to go from there.
So that's going to cause some other issues simply because most of those people were probably renters. And so there's some more non-rent payment coming up because everybody's in jail now.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I talk about is that that's the thing that we don't pay attention to. So it's not just getting a felony conviction. It's not just being arrested. There are consequences. There are collateral consequences. And so say that turns into a felony conviction and you don't serve prison time. Say you're on probation. But now you can no longer return to where you were living because you were living with grandma or living with mom, and they on Section 8 and they can't have any felons in the crib.
Whoa.
And so, or now you can't return to your job because you were in school for a medical profession or a CNA, or you were preparing to be a public school teacher, and now you got a felony on your back, and so you can no longer get licensed. So according to the American Bar Association, there are 45, get this, 1,000 collateral consequences for one conviction.
Wow. 45,000?
45,000. And so it can affect your housing. It can affect your livelihood. It can affect which licensing you're able to get. And, it varies from state to state. So in some states, you can't get a barber's license if you have a felony. In most states, you can't become a lawyer or a doctor if you have a felony. And remember, it doesn't mean you served a day in jail. You could have gotten probation. And so people don't think about that. And one of the biggest consequences is housing. You can no longer live in certain places. And in some cities, they really are just kind of pushing felons out and out and out and out and out into the outskirts because they can no longer qualify for affordable housing. So it's a real problem that people don't take into account, not just not being able to pay your rent. You might be able to pay your rent and not any longer be eligible to live in that particular place.
Wow. Wow. I'm
Yeah.
glad I'm squeaky clean, but geez, that's a lot of stuff to work. Just do the right thing. It's so much easier. Lord, 45,000 consequences.
45,000. So speaking of the news, so one case, I really didn't want to talk about this, and I've really been putting it off. Because now it's about a month old, but it's the R. Kelley debacle, I'm going to call it that. And part of the reason I didn't want to talk about it is, I'm from Chicago, I live in Chicago, and this is a very polarizing conversation to have about R. Kelley because he's from here, he's from the South Side, like I'm from the South Side, and he has not just diehard fans, I mean stark, raving, crazy fans who absolutely love him. And on the flip side, you have absolute people who want to burn him at the stake. Absolutely. So it's a difficult conversation to have. So according to just the charges before him, I know he has charges in Illinois. He also has charges, I believe it's in Minnesota. And then he had the federal case that he just recently lost in New York. And I'll start with the Illinois case. With the Illinois case, which hasn't gone to trial yet, he hasn't done anything on that case yet. It's just kind of following along the other cases. But when I knew he got charged in Illinois, I knew that there was going to be a major problem because at least in Illinois, sex cases are oftentimes life sentences. What? And it almost doesn't matter. You don't have to have 15, 20 victims. You can have one victim and multiple sex acts, but in Illinois, each sex act runs consecutively, meaning each crime is an independent, standalone crime. So you can get 4 years on one, 6 years on the next, 10 years on the next, and you add those up. They don't run together. Wow. And so he really only had to be found guilty of one victim. I don't know how many he has in Illinois, 15, 12, 11. I don't know how many victims there are. And I knew that. And the difficult thing here is you don't have to have a specific date on the indictment that these sex acts happened. So you can't be like, well, I was in Italy that day, or I was on tour that day. It could be, it happened sometime in 2012 in the winter. Like you don't have to be more specific than that. And so it just makes it very difficult to defend these charges, at least in Illinois. And so with that being the case, I knew that even if he was found guilty of one victim in Illinois, that he would have an extremely uphill battle. I think he's in his late or mid 50s. And so I knew that whatever sentence he got, it would likely be a life sentence. But just so happened the criminal case in federal courts went first. And it's kind of interesting how it was done. Taking all the emotion and all the the love of R. Kelley and his music out of the equation, it's kind of interesting how they did it, because they basically charge him like you would a major drug dealing operation or a major white collar crime. They followed the money. And so rather than simply focusing on, okay, he had sex with this person on this particular day and these are the allegations, they followed the money in terms of, okay, he shook this person down to get his tapes back, or he paid this person off. And then they had all the different people. And I didn't watch a bit of the trial. I didn't watch this documentary. I'm just talking about just the charges. So they charged him with racketeering. And so basically it means that there was an enterprise, and because of that enterprise, there was some type of extortion, and there was money exchange, and there were dirty dealings because of that money. And they focused on that route. And then they did the sex trafficking charges as well. But it was pretty much a creative way to go after somebody who the feds, who law enforcement has wanted for decades. And so it's really interesting that that is the first of the cases that he was found guilty of. So now he'll have to be sentenced there. And then I don't know which of the states will be next in line, and if he'll go to trial there or if he will strike some sort of a deal. But my understanding is he's looking at least 20 years on the cases he's been found guilty of, assuming he doesn't win on some sort of motion, a post-trial motion, or doesn't eventually get it appealed.
But how does racketeering fit into the sex crimes? How does that fit?
Well, like I said, they followed the money. So it's not the sex crimes themselves, it's that he blackmailed this person and paid them off, or he shook down somebody because they and paid them off to get his, I guess somebody took his tapes and he was trying to get his tapes back, his sex tapes. He had a bunch of sex tapes. And so they followed the money trail instead of simply looking at he had sex with this person or he performed this sex act on this day. They followed the money. And that's why, it's a creative way to do it. And that's why a lot of people were so upset. They were like, well, I've never heard of a so-called sex offender being tried in this manner, being charged in this manner, being convicted in this manner. It's almost like they crafted it to fit R. Kelley's facts. But it was a creative way to do it. They followed the money. They got all the witnesses to prove up the money, to say who they paid off, people on his staff, who they paid off, who they contacted, who they threatened, who they blackmailed, etc. And they followed that. And then obviously also put on all the different victims. My understanding is both male and female who he engaged in sex acts with.
Oh, I never. So I've watched Surviving R. Kelley, parts 1 and 2, I guess. And so they haven't mentioned any males, but the girls. So the thing that I hear all the time in defense of R. Kelley is the parents knew. But then what I saw on the documentaries with the girls was that even though their parents knew, the girls, somehow he just kind of kept them separate. Like he controlled where they went and what they could do. I'm not sure how that could wind up happening to your 15-year-old.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of pushback saying, why weren't the parents charged as well? And the parents who took money, why weren't they charged as well? My guess is, prosecutors get this to decide who they want to go after. And maybe there wasn't enough evidence against all the parents. Maybe they wanted the parents to be viewed as victims and still be sympathetic. That's my guess. But those are the broad strokes. It's, pretty awful to go after a parent whose child was a victim. So I think they just decided, we'll back off of them. We'll go after the big fish, and that being R. Kelley, because obviously there are other people on his team who could have been charged as well, but they primarily went after R. Kelley. He was the big fish, the big name, the one they had wanted for decades. And I think it was probably easier than them going after each individual parent and trying to show what this parent knew or didn't know. And I think that there was probably more of a paper trail via text message, phone calls, payments, checks, etc.
So is that part of the racketeering charge? So they know that the parents were paid off because they found that out during that whole racketeering charge part?
Yeah, so I don't know if it was just parents or if it was other people on his staff who were paid. Like I said, he had I guess he documented many of his sex acts with tapes.
And there were
And
tapes.
yeah, and there were tapes. And so he paid people to get the tapes back.
Wow.
So they followed the money. There was a money trail of the people that he blackmailed, the families that he paid off, the individuals that he paid off, and whether he paid them personally or had an employee do it. So they were able to follow the money trail as opposed to simply looking at he had sex with this person and they were this age, and he had sex with that person and they were that age, and he had sex with this person.
Well, that actually was pretty smart because the money don't lie.
Yeah, and then because then you don't have to worry about, if you have a paper trail, then you don't have to worry about testimony of an individual changing.
Right. Yep.
You don't have to say this is our star witness and she's going to say she was 15 when this happened, and then she hits the stand and says something different. No, if you just have the numbers to look at, okay, this was paid to this person. I'm sure he didn't write in the memo what it was for. I'm sure he write in the memo line what this was for.
Right.
So they still do need to rely on some testimony, but it seems like it's an easier, cleaner case to just follow the transactions, to lump it under the racketeering, say there was an enterprise, to say this money exchanged hands, to say that the money was used, was wired to this person or was paid to this person or etc., and prove it up that way.
That was creative, and that was pretty smart too. That was pretty smart.
Yeah, but it's unusual. And so it's like, then the question becomes, okay, if they did this for this one person in this one instance, but this isn't normally done, is that fair? Is that just? Will you do it for others? But I don't know that there's going to be a case just like R. Kelley's. I don't know that there'll be another big fish who, blackmail people or allegedly blackmail people or allegedly paid for tapes. I don't know if there's somebody out there who's a big fish who taped all of their sex acts and then the tapes got away from them. I don't know. Like, I don't know that we'll ever see this exact
right. Because even when they talk about, where did R. Kelley find all these young girls? But when you watch the documentary, you find that he would meet the young girls because the women that he already knew would bring their friends, and their friends would be their age or younger. Of course, he would meet some at the shows or whatever, but then it just became, bring your friends over. Mm-hmm. And a lot
wanted to be singers and dancers, so that was an easy draw. Like, he's the superstar.
Or hanging out at his house. If you're 16 and you hanging out at R. Kelley house, you feel like, because I've met people who knew him and went to his parties. I'm not from Chicago, so I didn't, Did you ever meet him? You're from Chicago.
No, I never met him. It's interesting. The day he got arrested for his first state case in Illinois, then it wasn't a sex case per se. I think it was a child pornography case because they couldn't pin him down for the actual sex act. So they went after him for child pornography. But anyway, the day he got arrested for that, it was all over the news, all over the radio, and he was told to stay away from any children. It was a condition of his bond to stay away from any children under the age of 18 other than he had 2 kids at the time. And so just so happened, I'm driving down 111th Street. At the time, there was a YMCA there. And I see all these girls, like 13 to 15-year-old girls. And that was weird. Like, you see them all in the street. They're all surrounding the front entrance of the YMCA. And they're like a few short steps there. And at the top of the steps was R. Kelley.
Oh, wow.
And it was crazy because, cars were almost crashing because it was such like a gapers delay, and all these little wild girls were running across the street so they get access. And I'm like, yo, you just got released from prison 2 hours. You got released from county jail 2 hours ago. How are you? I just was blown away. But it was clear that it was him. It was clear that all these little girls were surrounding him, trying to get access to him. And it was clear that it was a violation of his bond. So I was like, wow, he just does not care. But that's the closest I've come to meeting him. And I also know other people who were his dancers, who were in close proximity to him, but were not victims.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was interesting. I think that racketeering thing, that was pretty creative. That was pretty creative.
Yeah, it's just kind of, I don't know, it's kind of questionable because it's like, okay, you did find a way to box him in to convict him. I wonder how it will play out on appeal. Like I said, I didn't watch the trial, so I don't know. I can't say, oh, there was an error on day 3, or this shouldn't have happened, or the prosecutor shouldn't have said or done that. So I can't say, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and if he does have any issues for appeal because of how he was charged and how the case was presented. So the other thing that is going on is the Rittenhouse trial. So Kyle Rittenhouse is the white kid from Illinois who crossed over and went to Wisconsin shortly after the Jacob Blake shooting. So Jacob Blake was a major case that was in the media, a Black man who was shot by police. He was not killed, but he was paralyzed. And again, you know, a questionable body cam video that showed part of what happened. Supposedly he had a knife, but he walked away from the police and had his back turned to the police when he was shot by police multiple times. And so as a result of that, there were all kinds of protests in the Kenosha area where this happened and where he lived. And so this kid, or this 17-year-old white kid, came across the border, which isn't far from where he lives, came into Kenosha, but he came with an assault rifle. And when he came with an assault rifle, he actually ended up shooting 3 of the protesters. And so a few interesting things have happened. So they picked a jury. They picked, a jury is 12 people, but depending on the length of the jury, you will normally pick alternates. So right now, I think they have 18 jurors, because if it's a lengthy trial, someone could get sick, someone could die, someone could fall ill, someone could disappear. So you don't want to have to stop and then redo the entire jury because you don't have enough jurors. So you pick alternates. Okay. So I read that one of the alternates was dismissed yesterday. Maybe he's dismissed today and the event happened yesterday because he made a joke about the shooting of Jacob Blake. He made it to one of the courtroom personnel as they were walking him to his car, and that person reported him to the judge, and he was dismissed because they saw it as blatant racial bias. And thought that that meant that he was favorable to the defendant and could not be fair. Apparently another juror was dismissed as well. She's pregnant or something, and she was uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable, and so they let her go. But the issue in the Rittenhouse trial is interesting, or the issues. So he shot 3 people, he killed 2, and the 2 people he killed were also white, but they were protesters, or they were present for the protest. And then there's a question about whether they were rioters or looters. And so the first thing is, the judge in that case ruled the other day. So after they picked the jury, they actually started with evidence. I think a few people have testified. One was a reporter who was a few feet away from one of the men who was shot. But the judge ruled that the 2 people who were killed could be called looters, rioters, which is very unusual because normally a victim, a decedent in a murder trial, is referred to as the victim, or they're referred to as the decedent, or they're referred to by their name. So to be able to call them and basically vilify them as looters and rioters is very unusual, because it seems to show some sort of prosecutorial slant on the part of the judge. It seems to show some sort of bias on the part of the judge, because normally you just would leave it up to the jury to decide based on what they see and hear and what testimony they hear and whatever videos they watch as to what the actions of the decedent was. So for the judge to allow them to basically be called names is highly unusual. And it's just highly unusual. Normally our fight is, okay, judge, I don't want this person referred to as a victim, just call them by their name. Okay. But to call them a negative name, a looter, a rioter, is unusual. But the Rittenhouse trial is going to prove very interesting. So 1, he's not law enforcement. Two, he's a teenager who shouldn't have had a rifle, because in Wisconsin, the state where this happened in, at 17, he would not be allowed to own or carry an assault rifle. And so the fact that he not only carried one across state lines and then killed two people is problematic. But the first person who they're saying that he killed, they have video footage, and it sounds like that person, nobody knows exactly what was said between the two of them. I guess Rittenhouse had a friend nearby, but based on the video, you can't tell what was said between the two people. But it looks as though the other person, the person who was killed, was the aggressor. And so all of the witnesses who have hit the stand, the reporter, the friend who was standing by Rittenhouse, say that this guy was the aggressor. He was cursing at them. He was causing problems, I guess, at the protest earlier, and that he lunged at Rittenhouse and was then shot. This is significant, obviously, because if there's some sort of altercation or exchange, that might put Rittenhouse in a position to say that his actions were justified. But normally when it comes down to the issue of self-defense, the standard is force must match force. Mm-hmm. So if I lunge at you with my fists, or I lunge at you with my body, but I don't have any weapon that's visible to you, you have a problem. And then once I am shot and down, it's discovered that I had no weapon, that's a problem. So the additional factor is they're saying that the person that lunged at him had some sort of bag with chemicals in it. And I still haven't, I've read a few articles. I haven't found anything that said what the chemicals were, but for self-defense, a big part of it comes to the person who was the shooter, their perception. So if they say that Rittenhouse believed that these were some sort of deadly chemical or some sort of chemical to maim or to injure him, he may get off. Really? He might very well say, hey, I thought it was some type of chemical agent. The guy threw it at me, and then he lunged at me, and then I shot him. So I was very concerned when I read that. I didn't know anything about this bag of liquid or chemicals. I still haven't found anything that said what the chemical was. But remember, in the moment that it happened, it's what's in Kyle Rittenhouse's head about what it is. Now, so, it could be a water balloon. It could be filled with something completely unharmful. But if he believed that it was a deadly weapon of some sort, then he could respond with deadly force. Force must match force. So deadly force matches force. A gun normally would match a gun. You wouldn't, like the saying, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Right. That sort of thing. The force has to match force. But if he hits the stand and says, hey, I thought that this was some type of deadly poison that was going to kill or maim me, he could win. Now, that's just one. Remember, that's just one of the two people who were killed. And then he shot a third. So I don't know what the scenarios are yet from those other people. The reporter on scene who was standing nearby the guy who was killed, he actually took care of the decedent, took him to the hospital. I think they put him in a trunk and took him to the hospital, and he was applying pressure to him, trying to save him. He said that he feared for his life. And so Rittenhouse was also charged with something indicating that he shot recklessly, because the reporter does testify, even though he wasn't shot, he was fearful he would be shot. He was like, I was 15 feet away, and my fear was that I was going to get caught in this fire from this weapon that was aimed at the gentleman that he took care of. So it'll be an interesting case to watch. One, because everybody who was killed is the same race as the shooter. So that makes it really different, because normally what happens if it's a white shooter, our lives really aren't valued if we turn out to be the victim. If it's someone Black or Latino who was the victim, they find so many ways to discount the value of our lives. So it's very interesting to see a white kid who shot two white people, or shot three white people and killed two, how that's going to play out in court, if he will be seen as the victim. He's already gotten a lot of support from white supremacist groups who I think paid for his bond. Yeah. So they really rallied behind him and his mom when it first happened. And so, I mean, I'm assuming he still has that support now.
So I have a question. Mm-hmm. So he's 17 and legally he cannot have a weapon, right?
Yeah.
So doesn't that make everything wrong just from the bottom? If he didn't have a weapon, he wouldn't have killed all those people. So he's wrong. He went out with intent because he wasn't supposed to have it. It's not like he has a conceal and carry, and that's something that he does all the time, is carry a weapon. He specifically got a weapon and went to this place, I guess, where there were they rioting there?
Yeah, they were. First they were protesting, and then the protests went awry based on what the pictures and the articles that I've read. Yes.
Okay, so he went to where the looters and rioters were with a weapon. So that seems like there's some intent. Doesn't that count for something?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he was, a self-appointed vigilante, that he was going to go defend a city that he didn't even live in,
right,
with his weapon that he wasn't supposed to have. So yes, I'm sure all of that will be the argument of the prosecution, but he's still a little white boy. And I think that carries a lot of weight.
That carries some weight.
That carries a lot of weight. And I think what I read, don't quote me, I think what I read was that the gun charge alone, just being 17 and possessing the weapon, is a misdemeanor, which carries like 9 months in jail. So don't be surprised if all these charges fall away, if the murder goes away, if the other murder goes away, and he's looking at something very minor because he was a scared white boy.
He's scared,
Who shouldn't have had the gun in the first place, but
and shouldn't have been over there.
Scared. Yeah. So, but his thing is he believed that the mob was out to get him, that the mob, and then he had the one guy who apparently is on camera lunging at him.
So he went to
now why he kept firing after that. That's a great question. The second guy hit him with a skateboard because he was trying to get the weapon away from him, but that was after he had fired at the first person. So then you have the whole issue. Is that enough for self-defense? If someone hits you with a blunt object and you have a gun, I would say no, but I don't know the makeup of the jury. I don't have the jury full of white moms with kids Kyle Rittenhouse's age.
Wow.
Is the jury full of, all lives matter and blue lives matter supporters? I have no idea. So it will come down to how they perceive the evidence. And I will say juries do some very weird things.
Wow. That's very interesting. I have not been following that case, but now you made me want to follow the case and see what happens.
Yeah, and it's still early on. So they picked, and then I think only a few witnesses have testified. So it would be a good time to start watching it. They're still in the prosecution's case to see. And I'm wondering if the kid will testify. Normally you have to. In a self-defense claim, you have to almost hit the stand to tell your story, to say why it is you fear for your life, why it is you acted in this way. And you don't have to put on a lot of evidence, but you have to put on something saying, this is why I use force against this person. Sometimes you can get it in through other witnesses, but my guess is he's going to have to hit the stand to tell his own story.
And that's crazy, because how can you say it's self-defense if you went to this area where this was taking place? You went there. You didn't go home. You went there, but you felt the mob was going to get you or something like that. That doesn't make sense to me.
I agree, but it'll be, like I said, juries do very strange things, and they are normally very sympathetic of white male defendants, especially if the white male defendant is young.
Yeah, because they feel like he has a potentially bright future.
Or he was scared. He was surrounded by grown men, and it was a volatile situation, and he was scared.
But he
and
voluntarily
he made a better decision, but he was frightened.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that'll be one to watch. So the next thing is Dad's on Duty, and this is more of a feel-good story. I really loved this when I saw it. So this was probably about a week ago. So there were, in a Louisiana school, there were 23 arrests in a very short time frame. I mean, like 3 days, of students for fighting. And so rather than doing like every Chicago school and having more and more officers pile in to show a show of force, these dads in this school banded together and formed Dads on Duty. They got t-shirts printed and they manned the hallways. And they were in the hallways cracking jokes and giving a side eye to anybody who looked like they were about to be up to something. And suddenly them 23 arrests dropped down to 0. Just from the presence of these dads. And they said, and their goal is to reduce police interaction between the kids and them. And that's all the kids needed was a little bit of discipline, a little bit of love, a little bit of tough love from a dad who wasn't even their dad necessarily, to pull them to the side and be like, I'm gonna need you to do better. And so that's amazing. I think it could be an amazing model for the rest of the country, because like I said, in Chicago, the debate runs on, do we need these police resource officers? These resource officers in the schools. And my vote is always no, because I've seen the damage they do. I've had cases where 15-year-old girls were body slammed as though they were 6'2", 250-pound men by police officers in the school.
Why would they do that? What would call for that?
Well, the case I'm thinking of is they said that my client was involved in a fight with another girl. But what's interesting is they're in the cafeteria. There are cameras all over the cafeteria and there's no fight. So maybe it was a verbal fight. Maybe she was yelling at another girl. But in terms of her putting her hands on another girl, it's nowhere on any camera. But what is on camera is this grown white male police officer who weighed about 250 pounds. And he was about 6'2", who picked her up and slammed her down on the concrete floor and manhandled her like she was a grown man. She was only 15. So I have a real issue with these police officers' presence in the schools. And I think that when I see a story like the Dads on Duty story, one, it tells me the benefits of prevention. It tells me the benefits of having just, loving parents present in the school, and how that can have a tremendous impact, and how it can do so quickly, because they got results pretty much immediately. And so they said they're now, now they're making the plan more formal, but they want to be in the schools moving forward to reduce violence and to reduce interaction with police. So that really spoke to me.
Yeah, that Dads on Duty, I did read about that. I just kind of glanced over it or whatever. And when you brought it up, I'm like, oh yeah, that I saw that. That was really good. So the arrest went down to 0.
To 0 from 23. I think it was like 23 arrests in 3 days of students. Yes, for fighting, down to 0, just because these men were present. They said they knew that a lot of the students didn't have a male presence or didn't have a dad at home. And in some ways they feel that void. And the other students, even if they didn't have a dad at home or didn't have a male presence, they respected them. Like that respect factor was there, and they could just crack a joke or they could give them a quick glance and they would straighten up. And so I just love any stories about prevention, because so at the top of the hour, I mentioned that I'm a defense attorney, but I'm also a board game creator. And I created a game to teach teens how to interact with police safely, how to avoid the criminal justice system. And they learn it through different scenarios. And the funny thing is, like this week in particular, I've been getting a lot of pushback from like my Facebook ads, people commenting like a game can't make a difference and she's on some BS and just all these really negative comments. But it's like, no, prevention is really the key. Like prevention is where you think outside the box and you create something that hasn't existed before. And that's why I really resonated with these Dads on Duty. They didn't wait for the school policy to change. They didn't wait for, police reform. They didn't wait for the government to intervene. They were like, nah, grab your shirt, dude. We're going to the school to man the hallway. And it was an instant turnaround. And that's the thing, and that's the goal that I have for my game and the education that I do in schools, is that people latch on to prevention. Because like I mentioned before, with us, oftentimes we want to wait and be reactive. We want to size up the situation after everything is gone completely wrong. and then do damage control instead of putting some preventative measures in place in the beginning and not having to get to that point where we're, scrambling to fix it. And so I just really love any story like that where we're doing any type of prevention. And so with that, I'm going to drop my board game. So the name of my board game is Trials and Triumph, and students or parents or families learn 7 rules of police encounters. And the way they do that is through 54 different real life scenarios. And you can get the game at justicejunkie.store, justusjunkie.store. I spell justice differently because there's a saying, there is no justice, there's just us. And I wanted to flip that paradigm on its head and bring justice to Black and Brown families, teens, communities, because it is oftentimes kept from us.
And you know what? You should put a link to the game in the public group that we have for the radio show. Let's talk about it with Xavier Fox. It's a public group. And so that's where all of our listeners can get to know you, and you can interact with them and engage with them. And, that'll create a nice little buzz about the show, and they can tune in and listen to you once a month. I should bring you on more than that because you always get me riled up. I had one last question before you start wrapping it up.
Okay.
And I'm taking it back to the PPP loan, because I just want them to know how much time they're going to get if they're guilty.
I don't know, because the time that you get, the Fed system is really, and I don't do many Fed criminal cases. I'll just be transparent and say that. But I do know that the Fed criminal system, 1 is going to be based on how much money you took. 2 is going to be based on your criminal background, because they have a whole point system. And so if you have 2 convictions, misdemeanor convictions, even if they're from a long time ago, you might get more time than somebody who walks in the door who does not have that in their background. So it's going to vary, but a big portion of it is going to be how much money you took and how many people were involved in your scheme. Was it just you acted alone, or did you act with others? So yeah, so that's going to be something that I'm sure we're going to talk about more and more, because these task force that have been forming over the last year are going to start making arrests. And I think catch people off guard, because it's going to all happen at once. And then the flip side I didn't mention is it hurts legitimate businesses. Right. So just like I was getting the calls talking about, can you write me a letter about my bogus business that doesn't exist and I just made up 5 minutes ago, I was also getting calls from people saying, man, April, they froze our accounts. Like, we did everything right. We've been in business for 10 years, but they froze our accounts because they assumed that because we were Black business owners, it was fraudulent.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, there was a whole, there were 30 business owners at least who all knew one another, who were in the same bind, whose accounts were frozen. And so then yeah. And so they're like, we actually did everything. We actually have employees. We actually had a payroll. We weren't trying to skirt the system. We weren't trying to, they got checks. Some checks got frozen. And then you got all these overdraft fees, and you got, contractors that you've hired. You got employees that now you can't pay. You got employees' checks that are getting frozen because you wrote them a check out of that account. And so legitimate business owners were getting burned because of this scheme.
That is crazy. Yeah, that's bad. Oh, them NSF fees, once they start, they just snowball too. That is horrible. That's why I stopped doing weddings when I had a corporate event planning service. Often their last check will bounce and it can wreak havoc. Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to let you go ahead and wrap your show up. What are your last words for your listeners out here? I know everybody enjoyed this show. I surely did.
So if you walk away with nothing else from what I say, take my moniker, my phrase, shut up, lawyer up to heart. Please, 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 if you ever interact, I tell people, don't open your door for police unless you were personally called for help. If you were personally called 911, Other than that, you need to shut up and lawyer up. The minute you realize that you're being detained, the minute you realize you're being questioned, do not answer any of those questions. I don't care if you did it or you didn't do it. I don't care if it's a PPP loan. I don't care if it's something more serious, if it's something less serious. Please just shut your mouth, say, I want a lawyer, and don't say anything else. I don't care if your family does not have two nickels to rub together to hire a lawyer. You need to say the words, because that's what protects your rights. And I'm just going to do a quick shout out. Tonight, I'm going to be at the Joliet Historical Museum for a launch party for this amazing Black Lives Matter event that I'll be doing. And they got all kinds of stuff going on. They're going to be talking about know your rights. I'm doing that along with another attorney, but they have a lot of great resources. And that's tonight at 6 o'clock at the Joliet Historical Museum. So I'm excited and honored to participate in that event. And it's Black Lives Matter for Will County is the one that's sponsoring it, along with Justice for Wives Foundation and some other organizations are on board. So I look forward to talking to y'all once a month, or like Xavier said, maybe more than that, so that we can chop it up about these legal issues that we just really don't talk about, or a lot of times we don't understand, because oftentimes we turn a blind eye until something lands on our doorstep. But we really have to be more aware so that we can stop being reactive, start being proactive, and start really getting a handle on what justice looks like for us.
That sounds good. And when is your next show?
My next show is also December the 3rd at 1:00 p.m. And in the meantime, they can follow me at Justice Junkie on Facebook, at Justice Junkie on Instagram. Y'all can go to LinkedIn if you want to, but you won't see much activity there because Xavier and I agree. LinkedIn is pretty boring. But
maybe we have to make it exciting.
Well, you let me know how that goes. I don't really have any interest in that. So remember, justice is spelled a little differently, Justus. So check me out at those places, and be sure to also check out the game.
All right. And thank you so much. And don't forget to put your link in the group. Let's talk about it with Xavier Fox, so that the listeners can go and get the game from there as well. Make it easy for them.
Awesome. And I forgot, I'm doing a contest. If you can come up with a great name for my show, I will give you some great goodies, so we can talk about that next time.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna get in that game too. I guess you didn't like my first suggestion, so I'm gonna have to go to the drawing board and figure out something else. All right. Thank you, April, and we will talk with you on the next show.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.